Welcome to this presentation on medieval maps by Deidre Brill. And in order to understand maps from that time, we want to really look at the medieval worldview, which was that society was very highly localized during that time. People did not travel a lot, which meant that they had a very limited scope of knowledge about the world outside of their immediate community. Oral storytelling was really a major form of understanding the world outside of where they lived. And of course, religion was a huge part of that. In Western Europe, people were almost exclusively Christian. And so the church was the center of their world. It was their source of education and even entertainment, and of course, morality. And there was a very strong focus on the life to come, salvation. And so we can take a look at two particular works that bring some of those ideals and really portray them through those works. And one is a specific book called the Chronica Major, which was written by a monk named Matthew Paris. He was sort of a historian as well, and this was a history of the world that he wrote that also was a sort of travelogue. He wrote in it an itinerary of travel from London all the way to Palestine, even though he himself never made this journey. He based a lot of the geographical descriptions off of information that he had read or heard from other travelers. And some items he just invented on his own. And this, of course, is really seen as a Christian journey. So he drew a lot of mini maps and wrote a lot of very detailed information about geographical places in this particular travelogue. We can also take a look at a psalter that contained a map on this particular folio shown here. This one page shows a Mappa Mundi within this religious book. And a Mappa Mundi means a map of the world. And we can see here that, of course, it is a very Christian-centered map. There is God and the angels at the top of the world looking down upon it. Right here in the very center is the city of Jerusalem, because, of course, as a major religious town in the Bible, Jerusalem was at the center of the world, according to this map maker. And so there are, of course, a lot of symbols from religion and also from mythology, as we can see from some of these beasts down here, that blended with geographical points that were listed on this map. We'll take a look and dive in a little bit more at maps specifically now. As I just mentioned, both myth and reality were present in maps and in the symbols that were drawn on maps. And that local mindset really did come through in that these maps were all filtered via a Christian mindset. And often they were geographically inaccurate because the people making the maps were not the ones who were actually traveling to these places themselves. And they certainly didn't have a very good bird's eye view of many of the locations that they were attempting to map. We'll take a look at a couple of types of maps now. Ptolemaic maps were based off of the Roman geographer and mathematician Ptolemy. He wrote a book called Geographia, and hundreds of years later, in the Middle Ages, this particular work introduced map makers to mathematical concepts, and that they could use them within their map making, as he described. And so some of these maps we see use latitude and longitude lines, which are listed here on this particular map. And of course, these maps had a very strong focus on the three continents of Europe, Africa, and Asia, because those were the continents that were known at the time. Another type of map is Portolan, or Portolano, which is Italian for pilot book. Pilot book meaning a sea pilot, a sailor. So these maps were made for sea travel, and a lot of them focused exclusively on the Mediterranean Sea. And that is because the Mediterranean Sea was a major trade seaport. And you can see some lines on these maps as well, but they are not latitude and longitude. They're called rhumb lines. And they are for the 16 directions, north, south, east, west, and all the ones in between, that radiate from specific points that the map maker assigns to the map. And sometimes it's hard to tell which points they have assigned, but these were made according to compass directions as well as estimated distances between points. And these maps were used by the sailors, And they tended to be more accurate than some of the other maps. A few of them ended up being very accurate and have a very detailed coastline of places like Italy. And then finally, as we saw before in an earlier example, we saw a Mappa Mundi in the Psalter. This is another example of probably the most famous Mappa Mundi, which is in the Cathedral of Hereford in England. Mappa Mundi means sheet of the world. It means a glimpse of the world overall. This particular map, these types of maps, were less intended for navigation and more just to show the world in total to people for the first time. So they are usually not at all geographically accurate, and they are very heavy on symbols. They use a lot of religious symbols, such as the Red Sea here being parted by Moses. They include a lot of mythological creatures, much like bestiaries did at the time. But then they are also layered over with points of reality. And you can see that some of the areas of the maps where the map makers lived will sometimes be a little bit more geographically detailed than other parts of the map. Thank you very much for attending this presentation today.